you guys are doing well. So today I wanted to bring you this video. So I'll be showing you how to use Apollo Server with Prisma, and we'll be building out this application here. So let me demonstrate it to you. I could add new novels. Say, take the link of this. I paste it here. I call it Harry Potter. I add a novel and it should pop up here. Okay, I can also read more about the novel. I could add an author, J.K. Rowling's. I can add an author, should come up here, and I can delete an author. I could also change the title of the novel and also the image URL. So I'll go here, copy image link. I say, let's call it Potter, and I paste the link here. I update it and it should update here. Okay, if I go back, oops. If I go back, I could also delete it. Should go away, yeah. So this is what we'll be building today. Hope this will be useful to you guys. And everything here is the endpoints are created with the GraphQL server, and we're fetching those with GraphQL client. So here I've got an empty terminal. I'll cd into the directory where I want to initiate the next app. So cd yt, and here I'll create it, npx create next app at latest. So we'll name it GraphQL next. We want TypeScript, ESLint, no need the source directory, experimental, yes, enter. So this experimental app will initiate Next.js 13 for us. So this will install all the dependencies which is required. So that should be done now. So once that's done, I'll cd into that GraphQL next, and then open VS Code. So with that, I have it here. So just to test it whether everything's working, I'll run the server, pm run dev, and I'll head over to localhost 3000. So everything is working accordingly. So next, let us install Prisma. So npm I Prisma. This is for the CLI. So we'll install it as a development dependency. Hit enter. So once that's done, let's initiate it with npm init Prisma. I think it was npx init Prisma. Okay, I misspelled that. Prisma. npx Prisma init. Okay. So that creates a Prisma folder for us and this file. So now let's say what our tables looks like. So we'll have a novel table, we'll have an ID which is string, this will be at ID, and we'll be using UUID. So UUID, then why am I getting an error here? This line is not a valid field or attribute. ID string ID. Let me check that. We rewrite that. See again. String at ID. Okay. At default UUID. Fine. Next, we'll have a title. Should be a string. We'll also have an image, which should be a string, but it will be optional. And we'll have a created at, which will be a date time, and by default I want it to have the current time, so now, and updated at should also be a date time, and at updated. Okay, and finally we'll have an author. This will be a one-to-many relationship, so author will be array of author. So if I hit save now, it formats everything for me. That is because of this extension which I have. If I go here and search for Prisma, this is the one which I have installed, so that gives you all this, the coloring and the highlights, the formatting, all of that. Next we'll create our author table. So author, author, and we can actually copy this part and paste it here, and instead of name, instead of title, we'll have a name. It should be a string, and if I hit save again, it creates all this relation for me. That's a good thing which this Prisma extension provides me with. So now that that's done, we'll have to choose a database. So in our case, we are using PostgreSQL, and the database I'm using is Supabase. You could use whichever you're comfortable with. So if you're using Supabase, just head over to Supabase, sign up, and you will get a pop-up called create new project. Just click that and you'll be directed to this page. So once that's done, head over to settings, scroll down. You should go to the database, scroll down in the connection string, URI tab, copy this, paste it in the env table, the env file, paste it here, and make sure you give it the password which you entered earlier. So in my case, it is this right here, and I'll save that, close that, save this as well, and next I'll hit npx prisma db push. So this basically now creates these two tables in the database which you have selected. So here I should be getting a message anytime soon saying that it is connected. Your database is now in sync with Prisma schema. Okay, now to check that, let's go to Supabase, and if I go to table editor, I have my two tables which I mentioned here. I'll allow this. Okay, so once that's done, next let's install Apollo Server and GraphQL. So in their documentation, Apollo Server docs, if I go down to install dependencies, I get this line of code here. I'll copy that and I'll paste that here. So with that, we have our dependencies for Apollo Server and GraphQL. So while this is installing, under pages directory API, we'll have to create a new file called GraphQL.ts. Actually, before that, we have another configuration to make for Prisma. So if you're using Next.js, you'll have to do this. So if I go to Google and just Google Next.js Prisma client Next.js, and if I go here, best practice for initiating Prisma client, yeah, here. So we'll have to create a new file called db.ts, and you'll have to copy this out and paste this. So this is basically because while using Next.js, each time we save, it refreshes the server. So if we did not use this file, I mean these codes, each time we refresh the server, a new Prisma client is generated. So we don't want that. We want only one Prisma client for throughout the application. That is why we put this here. In the documentation, they've mentioned this in detail. So let me close that as well. Now, okay, so once we've installed the Apollo server and the dependencies, we'll have to create a new file called GraphQL.ts, and inside here, while using Next.js 13, it's a bit different. So I found out this GitHub repo, Apollo server integration next. I'll link this down in the description below. So basically, we have to copy this and paste it here. We'll also have to install this. Okay, npm I and hit enter. And for Apollo server, 4, we don't use GQL anymore. So we say something as hash GraphQL. Okay, so with that, we've created a GraphQL server. Now let's test this. So npm run dev, and if I go to localhost 3000 API GraphQL, everything should have worked properly. Let's check. Okay, so the server is running. Now we can define our schemas, our queries, and our mutations. So if this is your first time using GraphQL, here we have two things. One is the resolvers and the other one is typedefs. So typedefs are basically a way to document your schema, your queries and mutations, and resolvers are actually the functions which you'll be using to create, read, update and delete. So let me first let's start off by creating the schema. So let's say typednovel. So this should match what you mentioned here. Excuse me. Here in schema prisma. This should match what you'll be defining here. This is basically a way to tell GraphQL how your tables will look like. So title will be a string, and this exclamatory here means this is basically non-nullable, and image will have an image which is a string. We'll have created at, which will be a string. We'll have an updated at, which will also be a string, and lastly we'll have an authors, which will give an array of author, so one-to-many relationship. Next, let's create a schema for author. So type author, id will be non-nullable, and we'll have a name, or it will be of string, and a novel id to point to this novel here. So novel id string. Next let us actually create a query. So let's say query novels should give me an array of novel. So if you're used to REST APIs, think of this as endpoints. So query would be something, say a get, and novels would be like um, the slash novels, the path. That is basically what we put inside. And there is also something called type mutation. So this would be in REST API terms something called as post or put. You would basically put in mutations, and you would say add novel. That would be an endpoint and should give me an array, not an array, a single novel. So we'll get to this later. First let us actually see how to get this. Now in order to actually execute this, that is where these resolvers come in hand. So we have something called query to get the data, and we'll say novels, and the name of this should match what you've put here. So novels will give you an async, and you'll have three arguments, which is parent, args, and context. It should return, you'll await it, context dot prisma. So now I'm not getting any type definitions. So basically I'll talk about parents later. Args are basically whatever arguments you pass in here. So say I have an endpoint to get a single novel. This will give me a single novel. So this is how you would access one novel. You give it a ID and it should give me the respective novel. So whenever you're passing arguments here, in order to access these arguments, that is where these args come in. And context are basically anything which is shared across all your resolvers. So we'll actually start, we'll define a type definition for this. So type type context we'll actually export this, export type context prisma, and the type definition will come from prisma client, and this thing will pass here, context, and we'll also have to, we'll change this name to something more which makes more sense, Apollo Server. Copy that, paste it here. We'll have a context to be an async function. We'll have a request, response, and rec response, and prisma. Okay, so this prisma basically comes from here. We'll have to import this. So for that, let's import it. Imp prisma db and prisma. So now I don't think I have any errors, and we'll have to give the types for this. So in for all types of usage, I'll actually call this context. Okay, now I should get the TypeScript IntelliSense. Okay, I get it. So context is basically the shared instance across all your resolvers. So in this case it's prisma. So all these resolvers will have a resolver for query and mutation will point to the same prisma client. That is what context is. parent will do a little later. So context.prisma should point to novel table, and we should find many. Okay, and I'll save that. If I open my terminal, Prisma provides us with the GUI, which is called npx prisma studio, so you can interact with your database using this line of code. So if I go to Prisma Studio, I can actually create a new record. So let me create one. I already have one here. That is like while I was testing it. So let's call it test2. I'll give it a random image now. Okay, then I click save. So it takes some time to load. So till it gets loaded, we'll go to authors and create an author. Add record to name testman2, and if I click this one, I can actually select the novel. So let me click the one which I just created here, then I'll save that. So once it's saved, here I have the table which I just created and the author which I created. This points to the one which I just created. So once that's done, now let's actually test this endpoint. So here in our Apollo server, I've clicked novels here. So if you've created here novels, it should come up here. So I click plus. I want the authors. I need the author's ID, name, novel ID. I go back, give me everything basically, and I execute this. So now I get everything here. So if you've noticed, authors is null, but I have two authors. I have one author in one novel. So in order to access that, we'll have to actually chain resolvers. So if you go to Apollo server docs, you'll actually find it here. So in order to actually reference these authors, you'll have to create another resolver to point to these authors. So let's do that now. So outside the query, you call the table, which is another table, the schema, which is novel, and you point to the authors here. This one, we mention the novel type and the authors, one of the fields of the novel, authors. Basically now we can copy this out and we'll paste it here. Okay, so everything here seems correct. Okay, so this time we don't want it to point to novel but author, the author table, and save it. Hit save, come back here, let's re-execute this, and we get all the authors now for this novel. So this basically works now. But no, actually we've made an error. If I go to Prisma Studio again, I'll actually just click this. I'll just show you what mistake I made. I'll refresh this. Okay. This 3. Yeah. So I've created, this is which one? This is, okay, this gets all the novels, fine. So this is one novel, and if I scroll down, so I'm getting authors. If I go back here, one novel should point out to one author, but here one novel is pointing out to two authors, which is not what we want. That is because we've given it a function find many, meaning in this author table, find everything, which we don't want. We want it to point out to the author in a given novel. So in order to do that, find many, we can give it a condition where novel ID, which is one of the fields in the author table, should be parent dot id. If I save this and if I execute this again, now there's only one here. So for a given novel, there's one author. So this parent is basically any arguments which you pass to the parent query can be accessed by the child resolver through the parent. So whatever ID which I'm getting from here, I can access with the parent. So with that, we've created our first endpoint. Now let us create an endpoint for getting individual novels. Here we are getting an array of novels. Now let us try to access an individual novel. So I go here. First I'll have to name the endpoint. So I'll call it novel and I'll give it parameter which will be an ID, which is not nullable, and it should return me a novel, single novel. Now to execute this again, we'll have to create a resolver for that. So under query, you go down, I'll copy this out and I'll paste it here. I'll call it novel. This time I don't want everything, but I just want one. So there's a function for it which is find unique. We'll have to provide a condition where to access this ID we'll have to use this argument here. So where ID is equal to args dot ID. So now if I go back to Apollo server, there are two queries here. I'll select one. So I'll have to provide it a parameter. First I'll also mention I want everything here. So this, in order to put a data here, if you scroll down, come here, you can see you have all this necessary thing. Don't want that. So we'll call this novel ID. Let's just take a random one. Say ID of 1 will be 1, and I execute that. Now I'm getting individual novels. Let me try to get the second one. I'm getting the second one now. You could also conversely, you don't have to actually put it here. While using Apollo server, you could delete it here, just call it some query name, just pass it directly here. So 1 should still work. Yeah, it's still working. So with that, we've created an endpoint to get one value. Now let's try mutations. So in order to create a mutation, what you would do is create a type called mutation, and let's add a novel. This is the endpoint which will be creating add novel. It will receive two parameters. One is an image, which should be a string, a title, which will also be a string, and it should return a novel. Let's save that. Now we'll have to create a mutation for that. So if I scroll down, actually, I'll close all this. If I scroll down, this is query, this is a novel. I'll make a mutation one. So I'll call it mutation. I'll call it addnovel. Again, this name should be same as the one which you mentioned here, addnovel. And I'll copy this out. It's still here. Okay. And I paste it here. Now while adding a novel, all of this remains the same. We'll have to point to the novel table, and instead of find unique, it will be create. These are all basically Prisma functions which you can find in their docs. They have a bunch of them for creating, for updating, for finding unique ones. If I go to Prisma read, let's see, CRUD. So if you go here, you can find a bunch of them. They've detailedly mentioned everything. So let me start creating it now. So create would be instead of where, it would be data, I believe. Yeah, data, and I'll pass in the title. The title I can access through my args.title, and image will be args.image, and I save that. Now let us try it here. If I go back again, now I have mutations also. I'll click mutation, addnovel. I have to give it two parameters, image, title, and these are basically what you want to be returned. So I'll just select everything here, and these variables can be given here. So we don't need novel ID. We'll give it an image. Just call it pic.href, and the title will be test3. I hit mutations, and basically creates us the novel. If I go back to Prisma Studio and I go to novel, I'll refresh this. It should come up here now. Yeah, it's here, and it generated a UUID for us. Okay, so we've created a mutation for adding a novel. Now let us make a mutation for updating a novel. Update novel. So we'll have to again give it some parameters, an ID to point towards the novel, a title which will be a string, an image which will also be a string, and it will return a single novel. I'll save that. Again, go to mutations. I'll copy this out. I'll paste it here and change the name to update novel. And instead of create, I'll give a function called update. So this will have a where object where I give it an ID. So args.id, comma, and you'll also have to give it a data to replace the values. So title will be from args.title, and name will be args.name. Okay, I'm getting an error because, let me see. Okay, it's, let me go back here. Okay, it's an image, not a name. This should be image. Save that. If I go back here, am I getting an error again? Okay, I'm getting an error. Let me see what I made a typo somewhere. Just mention I have a capital T here. Let me save that. Now let me clear all this. Click mutation, update novel. We'll have to provide it with an ID, with a title and an image. Again, we'll get everything. So all of this we can actually, I won't give it here. I'll call it here itself, G. And the title will be, we'll take this one. ID is this. I paste in this. We'll give a title. So this was called test3. I'll call it updated test, and an image here, ABC, and I execute this. So again, this works. Updated novel. Now let us create an endpoint for deleting a novel. So again, it's the same. Under mutations, delete novel. We'll have to give it just a single parameter, which is an ID. Should be ID non-nullable, and should return me a single novel. Save that. Save that, and I'll go to my resolvers. I'll clear this. Go to mutation, and under copy this and paste it here, and I'll call it delete novel, and this will be delete. Instead of all this, it will be where ID will be args.id, and I save that. Again, go back here, we'll check whether it's working. Create delete novel. I'll pass it here only. So we'll delete this. We'll just copy this. Copy, paste, a quote, and I'll just return these three. Okay, status 200. This also works. Now let us create an endpoint for adding an author in this. So if I go back here, go to queries, I get all the novels. Just give me the image, authors, the name is. Okay, now let us create a endpoint for adding an author here. So let us add another author for, this is called title test2. Fine. So go to mutations and add author. Parameters will be novel ID to point towards the novel which we want to add it to. ID, it should be non-nullable, and the name of the author. String, it should give me an author. Now let's go to our resolvers, mutation, copy this, paste it here, and instead of delete novel, I call it the same which I mentioned above, add author, and instead of novel it will be author, and instead of delete it will be create, where we don't need a where. Data, mention a novel ID, args dot novel ID, and the name will be args dot name. Let's check that. Mutations, add author to give in a novel ID. So this one, oops, I can't copy. For some reason I can't copy. Let me go back to Prisma Studio. I'll copy this out. Copy this out, paste it here. It should be in double quotes with the name, novel ID, and ID. You don't need this. Hit enter. Okay, something went wrong. I have to pass in another thing. Okay, I'll also have to pass another parameter, which is the name. If I go, I've passed in 2, so another one. Name will be, let's say, Fred. Executed, and it created a new author for us. If I go here, crashed. It created a new one, Fred, and the novel ID as well. It linked it to the novel ID. Okay, so we've added an author. Now the last one would be to delete an author. So let's delete an author. And we basically need just the ID. Should be non-nullable and should return an author. So let us create a function for deleting it. Copy, paste, and change it to delete author. And author, here it will be delete, and change this to where ID is args dot ID. Save that. I broke something, which is very common. Let me go down. There's some syntax error. Let's see. On top, let's see. Okay, I've put in 2 colons here. Should be just 1. Now if I go back here, okay. If I go back, mutation should be a delete author. I delete this author which I just created. Copy that, paste it here, and I'll return the name, novel ID. Delete this also. Now I execute it. As you can see here, it's making all the SQL. It's giving me the code. Prisma is making all the queries, and this got deleted. So with that, I guess we've created all the endpoints which we'll be needing for the client side. Okay, I think that's it. So as you can see here, everything is messy. Everything is in one big file. It's a huge mess. So just to clean things up, we'll go to app. No, actually, let's create a folder in the root directory called GraphQL, and inside the GraphQL let's create a new file called typedefs, or let's call it schema. Schema would make more sense. Schema.ts, and I'll take all this out, cut, paste it here, and also export it. Save that. Then I'll create another file called resolvers.ts and copy all this, cut it out, paste it here, and export it. Okay, we'll also have to import this. Okay, so everything is fine now. Now here I'll import those resolvers. It should be from .GraphQL under schema. I need typedefs. Again the same, but this time be resolvers. I want resolvers. So with that, everything looks much better. So in the next video we'll implement the client side. We'll be using Apollo client to actually make a connection to the server and get the data. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching.